Hey guys, Agate here, and welcome to another episode of Spreadsheet Impact, the best way to deal with in-game boredom, and today we're doing a weapon ranking for Ningguang. As always, if you want to skip all the small print, there are timestamps in the description, so skip ahead, but everything I'm about to say is useful information to make proper sense of what you're about to see. Ningguang can be played as a main DPS, or sustained DPS, where she's on the field the majority of the time, or as a Quickswap burst mage where you swap in, unload your elemental skill and burst, and swap out again. Like last time, we're going to look at DPS windows of a certain duration for each of these playstyles, just so that we can account for time-related buffs and effects, as well as weapon cooldowns. The sustained DPS window used here is 15 seconds long, makes use of the entirety of her kit, and also accounts for some movement and dodging in between attacks. Her quickswap rotation takes just over 4 seconds to execute. Now, because Ningguang plays slightly differently with constellations, you could go ahead and define 3 separate rotations for each playstyle. One for C0, one for C2 where you get to use your Jade screen twice, and a third one for C6 where you get a bunch of additional Star Jades. However, since we don't have any catalysts that increase only elemental skill or only normal and charged attack damage, getting these constellations has no impact whatsoever on the ranking of her weapons. Sure, you'll deal more damage in total, but the relative position of these weapons to each other in terms of performance is going to remain the same, which is why we can actually get away with ignoring constellations for this comparison. Here are the general assumptions behind this ranking. Ningguang was assumed to be level 90, all weapons were assumed to be level 90, talent levels were 10, 6, and 8 for the sustained main DPS playstyle, 6, 8, and 10 for the quickswap playstyle. Artifacts are maxed 5 stars with an attack percent sans, geo percent goblet, and either crit rate or damage circlet depending on the weapon. I lied in the last video when I said that substats were assumed to be absolutely perfect, because they're actually not. Instead, it's assumed that artifacts come with all 3 offensive substats, attack percent, crit rate, and crit damage, and then out of the 5 upgrades that you get until artifact level 20, 3 of those roll into one of these 3 stats. These rolls also aren't max rolls, but average rolls. For example, crit rate rolls between 2.7% and 3.9%, meaning for the sake of these rankings, getting one roll into crit rate equals a gain of 3.3% crit rate. Over all 5 artifact slots, this means that 15 out of a total of 25 upgrades rolled into an offensive substat. The distribution of substats was still configured to bring out the most out of every weapon, so all in all, still very hard to achieve, but maybe not completely impossible. Ningguang's geo buff that you get for walking through her Jade screen was assumed to have a 90% uptime for sustained because it's rather easy to maintain, but you do need to walk through her gate first to get it going, and a slightly lower uptime of 75% on quickswap because relatively speaking, that first Jade screen that you're casting without this buff makes up a much bigger chunk of your entire combo. For artifact sets, it's 2 gladiators and 2 archaic Petra. Food, resonances, and elemental reactions were not considered, however I did include a comparison with and without Bennett's ultimate to account for possible team compositions. Next to these general assumptions, there are a few weapon-specific assumptions that we need to cover as well. Memory of Dust gets full stacks with 80% shield uptime for sustained, but only 3 stacks with 100% shield uptime for quickswap, because you're not able to accumulate stacks that fast in a DPS window of only 4 seconds, but you're also much less likely to get your shield broken. Lost Prayer. With this weapon, you need to stay on the field for 4 seconds just to get going, just to get 1 stack, and all of your stacks disappear if you swap out. This means that we have to assume 0 stacks for quickswap, and for sustained, even if you manage to stay on Ningguang for 12 whole seconds without swapping once, you'd have 0 stacks for the first 4 seconds, 1 for the next 4 seconds, and 2 for the last 4 seconds of this 12-second window, meaning on average you'd have 1 stack. And even that is being pretty generous in my opinion, because even if you're doing the sustained playstyle, sometimes you just want to swap out early anyway. Maybe to get in a counter with Beidou or just something else. So this passive is amazing in 4-player co-op, where you cannot swap at all. But in solo content like the Abyss, this passive sadly isn't good at all if you switch between characters a lot. Skyward Atlas gets half a proc for Sustained, because it only puts in work for you every other DPS rotation, due to its 30-second cooldown, and it also gets half a proc for Quickswap, because even though you only spend 4 seconds on the field, it's not like you can fit in more than 2 of these Quickswap rotations into a 30-second window anyway, because you still need to wait for your cooldowns and swap through all of your other team members. Plus, all you need to do is activate the effect of this weapon once, and it will do its job for the next 15 seconds, even if you swap to another character. Frostbearer gets 1 full proc for both playstyles, without the additional damage you'd get for hitting a cryo-afflicted enemy, since that's not really going to happen on Ningguang. Eye of Perception gets 1 full proc for Quickswap, and up to 1.5 procs for Sustained, depending on refinement level. I did not account for AoE damage here and simply assumed that this effect would damage the same single target twice for the sake of this comparison. For the Widsith, I calculated an average out of all 3 possible buffs and gave the passive a 33% uptime because of the 10-second buff duration on a 30-second cooldown. Solar Pearl got a 100% uptime on both buffs because they can easily be maintained, though you do need to be mindful of your abilities and spread them out somewhat to get the best uptime. Sacrificial Fragments gets to cast 1 more Jade Screen than all other weapons because of its cooldown reset. Royal Grimoire was calculated to give a 3% effective crit rate boost, just to not completely ignore its passive, although even that may be a bit on the generous side. Blackcliff Agate gets 1 passive stack at all times, just like in my last video. Again, keep in mind this weapon will be better against easily killable enemies and worse against high HP targets. Twin Nephrite's effect is similar to that of Blackcliff. Giving it 100% uptime wouldn't be quite right, so I gave it 50% instead for a reasonable middle ground. And here are the rankings. We'll first have a look at the Sustained playstyle. Memory of Dust ranks first, closely followed by Skyward Atlas. Lost Prayer seems to be the worst of the 5 stars because its passive is hard to utilize if you're forced to swap a lot. Refinements also don't do much for this weapon because it's so hard to maintain stacks. So it's still one of the best weapons to get, but one of the worst weapons to get twice. Solar Pearl is by far the best 4-star weapon to have for this unit. Its refinements put in quite a lot of work too, and at refinement 5 it even beats a refinement 1 Lost Prayer. Next up we have Widsith and Blackcliff Agate. They're both about equal in terms of performance, but they're both not the most consistent. With Widsith you never know which buff you're gonna get, and with Blackcliff it heavily depends on whether you can accumulate stacks or not. Blackcliff is the first completely free-to-play weapon on this list, if you're willing to buy it from the gacha shop. Then we have our 3 middle-of-the-pack attack percent catalysts, Eye of Perception, Royal Grimoire, and Frostbearer. Out of these, Eye of Perception is still the best, and its refinements actually do something, but Frostbearer is the only true free-to-play weapon here if we exclude Blackcliff. I'm not sure whether it's worth the sacrifice of a prototype drop just to get this weapon. At this point you may as well just use the 3-star Twin Nephrite for now and wait until you get something a lot better. But it's not like the other 2 craftable blacksmith weapons are anything amazing either, so it's up to you. At the very bottom we have a couple of catalysts that give either Elemental Mastery, Energy Recharge, or HP, so not the best options for a DPS unit. Okay, so this is the ranking, but before you take this at face value, please remember that this does not yet account for team compositions and external buffs. This is something that was pointed out on my last video, and just to give you an idea of how things might change in an actual team, I'm going to add a Bennett ultimate to these stats, and as you can see, all of a sudden it's Lost Prayer that ranks first, at least at Refinement 1. And the reason is that crit rate and crit damage weapons can leverage this additional attack boost much better than attack percent weapons that already provide a bunch of attack, but with relatively low crit values. This is the concept of stat dilution, or diminishing returns, that you've probably heard of before. Solar Pearl, another crit rate weapon, was already great without Bennett's ultimate, but with it it's just disgusting how good this weapon becomes. It's pretty much on par with Memory of Dust, which is a 5-star. You can also see that Widsith and Blackcliff, which are both crit damage weapons, are now much better than the other 4-star attack percent weapons, for the same reason. So the point is that if you're using any sort of external attack buffs, which I think Ningguang is a great unit to run with stuff like Bennett, or the Pyro Resonance, but it doesn't have to be those. It could be Thrilling Tales, or 4-piece Noblesse, or Xiangling's freaking Chili Pepper. Then crit rate and crit damage weapons will perform better, and attack percent weapons will perform worse than suggested by this ranking that looks at Ningguang in a vacuum. The reverse would be true if we had easy access to strong external crit rate and damage buffs, but there aren't many around, and attack buffs are just way more obtainable and flexible. Next up, let's have a look at the Quickswap playstyle. Skyward Atlas is by far the best weapon for Quickswap because of its passive that keeps damaging opponents even after you swap out of Ningguang. Memory of Dust ranks 2nd, and Lost Prayer falls behind even more because you're unable to get any stacks whatsoever when you're on the field for only a couple of seconds. Solar Pearl is still the best 4-star weapon and even beats Lost Prayer with just a few refinements, followed by Widsith and Blackcliff, but even Eye of Perception is not a bad choice for this playstyle because its effect is similar to that of Skyward Atlas. Royal Grimoire and Frostbearer are mediocre at best, and not much has changed at the bottom of this list. Now we're going to add a Bennett ultimate again, and even with 900 additional attack, Skyward Atlas is still the best weapon. This catalyst was made for a quickswap playstyle, and its effect is just really hard to beat. Lost Prayer is now much better for the same reason we discussed earlier, but it still can't make use of its passive and is easily beaten by Solar Pearl with just one additional refinement. Memory of Dust is left in the dust at rank 4, followed again by both 4-star crit damage weapons, and then the other 4-star attack percent weapons. The bottom of this list is again the same as last time. And that's already it for this ranking. If we learned anything from this, I'd say it's that Solar Pearl is an amazing weapon and the best thing to get for Ningguang if you don't already have another 5-star catalyst. I will leave a link to the Excel sheet with all the calculations in the description. If you want to play around with it yourself, be sure to make a copy first. I'm open to discuss anything that you've seen in this video. If you think I missed something or treated something unfairly, feel free to leave a comment or hit me up on Discord. If you'd like to see more of these for other characters, let me know. Thank you as always for watching, and sarabada.